Could you just say it quickly? Just a brief one.
Welcome, Chris. He's going to share some of the fascinating work that he's done on his thesis about how what happens when we do leadership development in a natural environment, and what he experimented with and what he's learned from that. So go for it, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you, Daniel, for the reminder. And first, I do want to thank, well, all of you for being here and being part of this community. We just realized that we've been doing this over a little over 2 years now when we started those calls early in the pandemic, and many of you have been here since the beginning. So thank you for being here and continuing to show up. And for those of you that have showed up, over those 2 years. And then I want to thank Kathy. Yeah, so I started my master's program, and one of the first books that I found and uncovered was Leading from the Roots by Kathy Allen. And there was a person at Prescott College that knew Kathy and made the introduction to Kathy for me. And we've just bonded, connected, not only personally, but also through our work. And so she's been an amazing guide. Thank you, Kathy, for being an amazing guide through my whole process, my 4-year journey in my master's program. So I so appreciate that. So folks, I just graduated my master's program in May. And submitted my thesis exactly. And Kathy was on the thesis presentation, and it was awesome. So I'm going to share with you, it's more of a friendly, a call friendly kind of overview of my thesis, kind of really a summary to just kind of dive you into it. It's a very practical thesis. So I think it'll resonate with many of you in terms of your own life, your own work, or your work with nature in some form or fashion. So I do have a PowerPoint for you. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint and bring that up here. And so it starts with what I'd call a pretty academic-oriented title to my thesis. So just bear with me, but it works. It's the words that I needed to use. But the thesis and my work over the last 4 years has been integrating the tenets of living systems. So much of, if you've all read Kathy's book, I think you probably all have, I'm sure. It's really, how do we integrate living systems, ideas, thinking, approaches, now shifting that into a practice-based design for leadership development. So Kathy's done such an amazing job of the big frame of looking at organizations as living systems, and how do we work within those, and how do leaders work within those. And I really wanted to take it all the way down into the ground, folks, all the way down to individual personal development work as leaders. Now, of course, it's hard to differentiate the personal development from the leadership development. In our world now, they're almost synonymous. I work on self, and that helps me be a better person and a better leader. But we can also tie it to capacities. How do we lead in a certain way when we're working with teams and with groups? And so this was my passion, is how to bring it all the way down from kind of organizational work into more human development work, as it then relates to how do we come back into our organizations with a new perspective, a new way of seeing the world literally around us. And I would say a way of seeing the more than human world as well as the human world. So I'm going to share with you the story that started it all. This is about 5+ years ago, before I even dove into deciding to do a master's program. And it started with me joining a program called the Soulcraft Intensive by Bill Plotkin, who's the founder of the Animas Valley Institute. Many of you may have heard of him. Dear friends with Joanna Macy. He's written a bunch of books, amazing man. And so I did his 5-day Soulcraft Intensive, feeling my own call to spend more time in nature and to really deepen my connection. I've always had an abiding connection to nature through backpacking and hiking and spending time in nature, but I really wanted to go through a practice of it, like going into a program that helped me look at my relationship with nature and doing my soul work, if you will, in nature. So I flew all the way up to British Columbia to an island called Salt Spring Island, which is just off the coast of Vancouver Island. And here in this beautiful place called Stoll Lake Farm, a 300-acre farm butting up against open space. We had plenty of places to just traipse around the grounds, eat organic food, and really spent most of our time outdoors throughout the whole day. Sometimes we'd come back as a group, do some work, and then spend time out day and night out on the land. And so on day 4 of this 5 days, I really had a profound experience. I remember as a child having this intimate connection with the natural world, a real intimacy. of a connection rather than just appreciation or the sense of beauty, but a deep, intimate connection. And on day 4, climbed up to this hillside, this kind of knoll where there was this old, huge pine tree that had kind of its roots exposed, and they were sort of burnt and charred, and just fascinated, and just went up to this tree and kind of hung around, sat down, leaned against it, put my hand on the bark, and just was curious about, well, what happened? A fire must have blown through here. And what happened was that a conversation sparked up. And this conversation with this tree, it was like a visceral experience. For me, it was clairaudient. I was hearing the words and asking questions and then getting responses. And this beautiful pine tree at the end of this conversation of maybe 10 minutes or so, of just what happened to your tree, and a fire came through, and then, I asked this final beautiful question of this beautiful tree, which I called Dear One. It's just sort of what came to me. And Dear One called me Little One. And what came, the message in asking is, I'm feeling a call to something new in my life, Dear One, like something, I'm not quite sure wants to emerge for me, but what advice do you have for me, or what do you want to offer to me? And this tree, Dear One, said to me, teach them to love the earth again. Teach them to love the earth again. And it was like moving for me, very moving. I feel it now. And it was just a deep moment of just connection and beauty, and this opening of the possibility that I can be in this deep, intimate relationship with the more than human world, with the natural world, that can inform who I am, and who I am as a man, as a leader. And so what I began to unfold in the days following was that the them for me in my calling, the them as leaders, partly because of my own long history of doing leadership development work and teaching in different settings around purpose and missions of service. And so it started to kind of say, them as everybody, including myself. But specifically, it was like, how can I begin to engage leaders, organizational leaders, in this journey into an intimate, loving, deep relationship with the earth that could inform who they are, but also potentially inform their decisions in their organization to make the kinds of choices we need going forward in our world now. And there are definitely some new and different kinds of choices we need to make because of where we are and where we've arrived as a human species on the planet. So this is the doorway. This is the doorway that opened me up to asking the bigger questions of myself, and then beginning to say, it's time for me to be a student again, to learn, like to go into a process where I'm going to be learning, not just creating, going from this amazing experience with this incredible pine tree, Dear One, into all of a sudden just creating a program or doing something programmatic, rushing through. I knew I needed to settle in and really look at what's here and how can I digest this and learn. So the questions that came up for me was, how can we engage nature as teacher and guide in helping leaders to grow, develop, and evolve, like to just open themselves, grow themselves. And intentionally though, right? So this is my thing, is we could spend lovely time in nature and appreciate it. How might we use nature as a guide to help inform our leadership, or ourselves as leaders? And then the other question clearly is, how can we support leaders in discovering this intimacy and love of the earth that can then help impact the decisions they will make in their organization, in their own lives? Like this idea that even Richard Louv is bringing this with Last Child in the Wood and the nature principle, is just getting outside and having this intimate connection with nature can create so much insight, depth, love, connection. So those are the two big questions. And then so as I moved through my master's and I got into the research project phase and doing my thesis, here is the practical statement: is the purpose of this research is to explore and assess the impacts of a proposed nature-based leadership development design. I'll share that with you, a design for how we can take nature practices and bring them into leadership development, with specific nature practices on the personal growth and capacity building of organizational leaders. So certainly it's just individual growth. What do I learn? What am I getting from this experience? But how might this inform specific capacities and grow those capacities? So the research question, coming back to living systems, is considering living systems. What are some of the ways in experiential leadership training in nature might impact organizational leaders in their personal development and in their roles as leader. It's getting harder and harder for me as a thinker around this to separate leadership development from personal development. 30 years ago, absolutely. Personal development was over here. And Kathy knows this, leadership development was here. And you got into a conference room and you talked about walk the room and 1 minute manager, whatever. So right now though, it's like they're blended, but there's still that flavor of how do I grow myself, but how does that also relate to my leadership, kind of both and. So in exploring the literature of this, just kind of I wanted to show you the categories of what I looked at. So certainly applying living systems thinking to leadership. Kathy was a huge part of that. Steve Jones, Peter Senge, Janine Benrus, those are some, people that are huge in the space that point back to leadership, to nature as a way of teaching and guiding us. Ecological identity and reconnecting with Earth. That's Thomas Show's work, Louv's work, Joanna Macy, Bill Plotkin. And then this key thing, and is nature-based practices to support insights and capacity building. So that's like Mortali, Coleman, Kemmerer, and Macy. And in fact, Lori Schwanbeck, who's on this call, her partner, Mark Coleman, was a very important part of this for me too, because of his work of meditation in nature and nature-based practices for awakening. And then the ecology of human development and leadership, Bronfenbrenner's work, Shelton and Hurst. So I was trying to look at all these different areas to make sure that I was getting kind of a 360-degree view of this. And so out of all of that, out of all the research and my own experience, my own knowledge, my own work with leaders, plus what I was reading, plus checking in with Kathy and my mentors and advisors, I wanted to develop a design. You can call it a framework. Kathy's been really great about continuing to help me reframe my languaging, to really look at the kind of decolonializing my languaging from like model and framework into a design, and that nature works from design. So this design is the classic circle, sphere. Nature is about circles and discs, the disc of the moon, the disc of the sun, the sphere of the planet. So the circle of this is 4 pieces or 4 quadrants of this circle. And so this is where I wanted to take this as a framework or design to take people into nature and build practices around this. And then I gave these names. I gave these simple names that can relate to the specific capacity that I was looking at. So looking out as a kind of sort of metaphor, looking out is about sensing. It's looking out into the world, into the space, and sensing what's in the space, whether that's looking out into a forest or what's happening in a boardroom, in a meeting. I'm sensing the space, I'm looking out. And then the other capacity or the other quadrant of this design is looking in. And that's the capacity of feeling. So this is the space of looking inward. What am I feeling? What am I noticing within me? What's coming up? This is the place of emotional intelligence. This is the place of understanding the inner terrain so that I can be more impactful when I'm more aware and conscious of the inner terrain. So looking inward, looking in. Then it's choosing, and choosing is all about this idea of decision-making, choice, choosing. And this is that capacity of acting, of acting. So what choices am I making? And then what are the impacts of my choices? And then even owning those impacts. So a lot of this is about, as we look out into nature too, we can start to see simply as I'm walking on the ground, I'm having impact. As I pick things up or I tear things off a tree or whatever, I'm always looking at what are my choices that I can also bring back into the organization. And the 4th area is being with, or the capacity of presencing. And that's really, again, so much like Peter Senge's work and others, Otto Scharmer, others, it's like really deeply embodying presence. I can just be with whatever is here in the space. I don't have to run from it. I don't have to hide from it. I don't have to confront it or fix it. I can just be with. And I intentionally wanted to choose very simple names for these pieces: looking out, looking in, choosing, and being with. And then I did a little bit of work to try to overlay the 4 elements, the 4 natural elements of earth, water, fire, and air, to kind of bring some of that kind of the classical natural elements. And even if you added the 5th, which you could, which is ether, that would be the center of the whole mandala here. That ether would be where the green dot is in the middle. So this is the model that I developed without testing it. I just kind of created it, pulled it from all my sources, and then the whole point of my project was to test this, to actually create a workshop and do what I was imagining with this design. And so the workshop that I developed was predicated on this simple, grid here of what is the quadrant name, the core capacities, as you see there, how that might relate to a living system tenant, and then 2 practices for each quadrant. And I'll show you in a moment that each of the practices were done over the course of the day. The looking out practices, 2 of those, looking in, the 2 practices, choosing and being with, unfolding in a day, and then to see what comes up for people, right? And so the methods, 1-day workshop in nature, I recruited organizational leaders from the San Francisco Bay Area. Throughout the day, we did 20 to 30-minute sharing sessions after each of the quadrants. So we were collecting like focus group information, and then one-to-one Zoom semi-structured interviews where I interviewed people for an hour, each person individually, after the workshop. So as they were integrating back into their day-to-day life. So here's a little photo of the folks, and we did this in Marin County, just north of San Francisco, in the headlands, up near the peak of Mount Tamalpais. The first peoples that lived and inhabited this area were the Coast Miwok. And so we did a little honoring of the Coast Miwok at the beginning and really honor those people on the land and to do a land acknowledgement. And then we dove into the workshop. This is kind of small to read, but I just wanted to show you it was sort of the welcome, introducing and talking about the framework or design, and then moving through in about half-hour chunks, roughly, the 4 quadrants, and then having a sharing session after each one, and then a final wrap up at the end. And so I'll kind of wrap up here, and I certainly would love to have this interactive and questions with you all. But these are just a little sampling of some of the results. This was a phenomenological study, so it was just more about what were people experiencing and capturing those experiences, and then looking for themes in there. So as I looked at the results, the discussion, the looking out and sensing was I'll just hit a couple of things here, is that the majority of the participants really, it gave them permission, the whole looking out practices, to notice more, to see more, and look beyond the obvious, to open their perspective and also to narrow their perspective. One of the practices was hard eyes, soft eyes, and then a walking, kind of a sit spot, and then a walking with hard eyes, soft eyes. And I can go through these if you want to ask about some of the practices, or I can go through them in more, a little bit more detail. But this first one was the sit spot, looking out and opening, awakening all the senses, and then walking with hard eyes, soft eyes, which simply means allowing your perspective to focus really in on like a flower or a bug or a rock, and then allow your perspective to come out and just take in the whole feeling and the felt sense of the place, opening your senses into a soft gaze or an open gaze, and then play with that from narrow, focused gaze to wider, open gaze, and doing that kind of back and forth to feel that. And so a couple of just quick quotes here in like this, Randy, all these names are changed to protect the innocent. But Randy said, in the soft gaze, soft eyes, there's a lot I don't see. And when I hone in, there it is. So that, like, honing in, that had relevance for me. What I am not, so the question was, what am I not seeing in my work with my staff? How can I apply more hard gaze or focus gaze to what's happening? I found that extremely useful. And then Frank said, thinking about my team, I wondered how soft eyes, hard eyes could be brought to looking at people, and how to bring both when working with my team. I don't often do both in a moment of tension. To be able to, in a moment of tension, just pull back. Because Frank was telling me later in the interview is that he'll get really into fix-it mode. So if there's tension and frustration, he'll want to get very focused, and it's hard for him to open his perspective and his gaze to just come back. So being in nature and having this incredible scenery around him, opening his perspective, he was able to see, oh, I can do that at work too, to kind of get out of my narrow band and into a more wider perspective. And then looking in is the feeling. People talked about a playfulness and a feeling of a childlike energy, which it was really lovely to just kind of be out in the barefoot walk. Oh, sorry, the practices were the barefoot walk and then an inner space meditation. And the barefoot walk was just awesome. You know, a lot of people have said that other than maybe on a beach or in their house, they hadn't taken their shoes off in years and years to walk in a meadow, to walk on the ground. They talked about feeling vulnerability, out of balance, or even pain with the walk. And they related this back to their work too, which was really sweet to see, oh, the vulnerability and how when I'm uncomfortable, there's vulnerability. And then others spoke to the importance of letting go, trusting nature and one's own intuition, the awareness of duality between thinking and feeling, and tap in the sense of tapping into internal validation. And so Kelly shared, the tenderness of my feet brought me weirdly back to my work. I don't feel like there is enough tenderness at work. And that feels like it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. We talk about bringing our whole self to work, and I want to invite that more to my team for us to be more authentic, more vulnerable, and she's saying more tender. So that was that. Choosing is the acting, how we act, choices we make. This was fox walking, which was more about from a native tradition, particularly Native American tradition, of a certain way of walking, to be silent as much as possible. It's a kind of a toe to heel walking, toe to heel. And that was great because it was walking, and many of the people kept their shoes off for the fox walk, but it created a much more intentional walking, very focused. Like, okay, I'm doing this. And so many said that there was this about power and agency of the choice. For every step, I had to make a choice. Participants talked about collaboration, primarily collaboration with nature, as they constructed their rock cairn. So the second practice was to build a rock cairn, like a way showing cairn with stones or other things. You could even put sticks or leaves, whatever. And they referenced how they found themselves connecting with the various elements of nature with rocks and sticks, and to see if they wanted to be in the cairn or if it made sense, or, this worked and this didn't work. So Maria says, it brought me back to Cusco. Maria's from Peru, and the trails there with cairn trail markers. And as I was doing it, it felt like my team. It kept working and then falling apart over and over again. The sweet part of it was the patience that it took for me to put it together, but the acceptance that it's not going to stay like that forever. She was having a lot of challenges with her team, and this really showed up for her as her patience around, oh, it keeps falling down, and that's okay to a certain degree. That, and then the final one, being with, presencing. Participants talked about the gratitude they had for this community of people in the land. So just being present with everybody and the natural setting there. They spoke about the sense of belonging in both the human and the natural realms more strongly. That was really helpful for me to hear that, which was really beautiful. And they talked about the beauty and simplicity relating to their time communing or bathing with nature. So this last one was a forest bathing practice, and then a final guided meditation to really bring home the sort of presencing. And Kate, just a little longer quote than I should have put in here, but she said, sitting in meditation, I noticed the play between when I was feeling my senses and feeling the air, and how I could be very present, and how my mind would come and I could be very busy for a while and I could drop into my senses. And it made me realize how, when we're indoors, how much we are robbed of our senses. So just really beautiful. And so to wrap up, this is my final slide. So obviously I had a lot more feedback and digesting all that feedback, but 4 key themes emerged from this that I'll continue to explore and work with as I look to do this work, more of this work. Theme 1 was being in nature for an entire day, engaging in experiential activities. So intentional, not just hanging out in nature and looking at the trees, but experiential activities with other people was profound, rejuvenating, joyful, thought-provoking, and beneficial for all participants. All participants said at some level, this was helpful, profound, joyful for me. Theme 2 is having this as a shared outdoor experience with other adult learners created an inspired community feeling out in nature. They loved hearing from each other. They even wanted, unfortunately, because it was a research study, it wasn't like I was building a community. So they were like, I want your phone numbers and your email address. Let's keep talking and connecting. And, it's like, sorry, gotta keep this, somewhat confidential. And then the practices 3, theme 3 was the practices had a positive impact on the participants and supported insights and personal revelations that they were able to link back to their leadership and work. So time and time again, not all through all practices, but everybody in somewhere of those 4 different quadrants were able to see something in their life and their work with their team and relate that back. So some insight came. And then the last is something for further research for me, but there were a number of comments around the design, the framework, and all its components, like the 4 elements and the living system principles and all of that, was somewhat confusing and not clearly understood by many of the participants. So partly that's just, you know, my work of providing a space to kind of share a bit more about it. But there was a lot. There was kind of like too many pieces for some folks overlaid in it. So that's something to keep exploring. So that's it. That is my presentation. I'm going to stop share on this, or you know what? I'm going to go back here if there's any questions, because I didn't really give a lot of time to the practices. But I'd love to open it up to any questions before we go into a breakout group. I'm looking at the chat too here. Great. Oh, and Steph says aligns with the Tetra map assessment. Ooh. I haven't even heard of that, Steph. Will you send me that off?
Yeah, I'll put a link in the chat. Let me go find it.
Yeah, please. And just to let you all, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, okay. As you brought out 4 quadrants, and again, thank you for doing this because it's important more than ever, right? Given our planets. But the 4-fold way, powerful. So as you were talking, I looked that up because I was curious the overlap and the connection there, and there was a nice amount of overlap, yet reinforcing of each other. So
thank you, Marianne.
Just very cool.
Yeah, and I even just borrowing from some of my own knowledge of the 4 directions in the Native American communities, and just that there's a meaning to the directions as well. And so it feels like for me, it's an evolving design, like I want to keep reading like about the Tetra, what does she say? The Tetra map, and about the 4-fold way, which I read a little bit about it, but I didn't go into depth on it. So yeah, thank you, Marianne.
Yeah. They just connection to leadership. I looked up, one author has kind of turned it into a whole, or one person has turned it into a whole workshop, etc. But basically having the warrior, the healer, the visionary, and the teacher as 4 roles. Yeah. So you overlap that in a leadership kind of work, and kind of cool. Very cool.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. Yeah, very cool. That's my hope, is that the model, I've experienced other leadership models, which, many of them are lovely, but for me, they're very complicated. They're very heady. And I was wanting to move something into more embodied, nature-based, and simple. And it does feel like the 4-fold way, the 4 agreements, the 4 directions, the kind of solidity of the 4 pillars. And just so you all know, is starting to look at how do we navigate a way of being in balance, or moving in and out of balance of each of those, so that there's a quality of there's no staticness in this. Some people were already sharing is that I noticed that I naturally go to looking out more. I'm always looking and checking what's in the space, and I forget to really pause and look inward. And that's a great mapping for me to say, oh, there are ways that we're overdeveloped in these capacities and underdeveloped. How can spending more time in nature, or nature practices, or whatever practices can help us to deepen an area that feels less developed, or an aspect that feels less developed?
Shamrit had a question in the chat.
Yeah.
And then I have one, and then Kathy.
Okay, I'll just, so Shamrit, do you want to just say, I'll read it out. Could you see this being adapted for people for whom it's difficult to spend time in nature, i.e. with physical disabilities, and also adapted to be used day to day by an individual outside of workshop setting? Yes, beautiful questions that came up in my research and my planning. It was actually a question that I needed to ask people if they had, physical limitations, things. I absolutely believe this can be adapted to any population, even by just doing it literally in a park near the office, Golden Gate Park, for example, or any accessible area where you can get somebody into a nature setting without having to go up in the woods and out, because the practices work as long as there's a bit of nature, there's grass and a tree and sky. I believe you can do this with anyone. And that is something I'm exploring, is how to, if I do it with a team, is asking those questions early on. What do we need to know here about your team? And then let's craft the experience that works for the team. And then it says, and also adapted to be used day to day. Yes. And so one of the things I've done in my first engagement with this is had follow-on calls, what I call integration calls, coming off the day. And those integration calls were exactly what you're saying, Shamreed, is to help them continue to use the practices day to day, whether it's inside the office or making, trips out into nature. One person shared with me that coming off this, he actually works in New York City, and he just went out into Central Park for an hour and a half in the middle of his day and just laid down on the grass and looked at the sky. And he hadn't really ever done that, but he had a stressful day. He just did it. He came back to the office. It wasn't like a day off. He came back and felt reinvigorated and rejuvenated with a very simple nature-based practice that he can now do that day to day. And same with the presencing work, the sort of meditation in nature. You can certainly bring the mindfulness and meditation practices in day to day. Thank you. Yeah,
That was a
Daniel.
beautiful response.
Yeah.
Chris, you talked about how you're having a harder time separating personal from leadership development. In the past, it was more so. I'm wondering if in your research you noticed, is there more willingness for businesses and corporations or people to actually engage in a workshop like this and see and find value in it? Because maybe even 5 years ago, I tried experimenting with something like this about 10 years ago, and it was hard to get people or their teams, their businesses to say, this is a worthwhile leadership development activity. You're going to go spend time in nature? What? So wondering if you found a shift in that, or if you found a way to frame it that people were willing to spend money, time, resources to devote to this practice to make themselves better people, better leaders.
Yeah, I have seen that shift over the last several, even before the pandemic, over the last 5 years, I've seen a shift into more creative ways of engaging the team and developing capacities, connection, and team building in very different ways. And I know you've probably seen over the years the kind of team building retreat of a sailing program or a ropes course or a high ropes, low course. That's always been there, but I think there's more willingness to blend in real actual capacity building with more of those kinds of adventurous, out of the box kind of thing. Daniel, I'm also in a bit of a bubble in the San Francisco Bay Area, because I will tell you, all those companies, I mean, hundreds of companies love this kind of stuff now. I mean, it's so different in different parts of the world, in different places, and different kinds of industries, but at least in the sort of the tech world and in the Bay Area, you've got hundreds and hundreds of companies that are very open to doing this. And so I think for me, the natural shift of this is it's sort of a leadership retreat that leads into a little bit more ongoing leadership development work. That's my way in. Instead of this is a hardcore leadership development program, it's like it's a bonding experience, a retreat that can lead to how do we weave this more into our day-to-day work as leaders. And my hope and my next step is that there are organizations that take it on as really, we want all of our team to experience this, not just a select few or senior leaders.
So as I was hearing this again in its various forms, one of the connections I had was actually with Dale, who's also on this call. So Dale is a board chair of a network of communities in rural Nebraska doing leadership development to create resilient rural communities. But I've been thinking, Dale, in all of the leadership development work that we've been doing in that network, the work that we're doing there is really about anchoring people in place so that they care about their place and that they will work for the future of that place. And yet in our training, Dale, we don't take people out and do this in the place physically so that they begin to love the dirt, so to speak, that they're standing in. And so as I was listening to Chris, I was thinking there might be an experiment embedded in that.
Most of our colleagues in Nebraska live in small rural communities, and much of our occupation involves being out in nature a lot. So actually, my idea of a great weekend is to spend it inside by an air conditioner sometimes, especially this time of year. It's not to go out into nature. And because we are out there so much, and every day, almost every day, I get to experience the wonders of nature in my work. And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about the occupation that I've chosen. As you were making all these points and the elements that you brought forth, one thing that I found that I thought might be interesting is the element of how nature can be so brutal. I mean, and we've experienced that with the fires we've seen, and you mentioned it with the pine tree. And right now in Southwest Nebraska, I've been farming 50 years, and we're in the middle of the worst drought that I have ever seen. And when I go to the farm today, we have some irrigation, and our crops under the irrigation are doing okay, but all of our crops that rely on natural rainfall are just about dead now. We will have no crop this year if we have another week of 100-degree temperatures, which is forecasted to be that case. So one thing I think we need to not lose sight of, and I think we utilize it in teaching our people in our network in Nebraska, is that, you know, in the face of these hard forces and this brutality that nature sometimes brings into us or on us, we need to make sure we understand that this is normal, that there can be very hard times, and that you need to figure out ways to push through those, and hold that optimism that there will be a day tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now where things look completely different. So that's something that I think needs to be an element of teaching people in these nature-based systems, is to help them understand that times can be very difficult. I've been in Marin County. The day I was there, not terribly long ago, is beautiful. So, in Nebraska, we talk about having nice weather and being able to enjoy it outside, but usually it's only for about an hour or two each day. So either that before or after, it's either too cold or too hot or too windy, or whatever. So
Dale, well, it's a really good point about just the nature is nature. So nature doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be perfect and sanitized or always beautiful, but it still is a perspective. As I see rough times, I'm still holding it as it's nature doing nature's thing. And I think some of like the day that we did the workshop, it got really hot, and blazing sun, and so there was even the talk about, wow, this is hot out here, and it's and everybody in California knowing that the fires were on their way, Dale, and all that. So there was some talk about that, as how dry it is, and the hot sun, and walking barefoot on the ground gave people a little bit of that sense with keeping it safe, Dale. I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, you could take them to a fire zone, right to the front of the fire zone to show them, but also you want to create a safe experience for people that's accessible. But I agree with you, is it's all of it, not just a sanitized, beautiful part of nature, needs to be expressed or shared or discussed. Right on.
Well, I think it's really good to learn those coping skills, or at least be able to put them in some sort of context where you realize this is part of that experience, and that every day is not going to be puppy dogs and rainbows.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. And I'm even looking at Shamritz's the cycle. This reminds me of the adaptive cycle and the cycle of birth, growth, maturity, death, collapse. Absolutely. In fact, I was looking at, I didn't want to overcomplicate it, Shamrit, but I was looking at also a low overlay of the 4 elements of the adaptive cycle that could be just, again, a part of a learning process for people as they're looking at the cycle of nature and the cycle of life. So that's a great point. All right. Thank you all. I know I don't know if we're still going to have time to do a breakout group, but where are we at with that, Daniel or Kathy?
I mean, we still have a couple questions with Simon and Emily, if people are good to continue on with those two. And then I think small breakout groups probably won't happen today unless there's a big desire by all of you to break into like groups of 4 to discuss more deeply. Okay.
Great. Yeah, Simon. Yeah, I didn't see the hands raised.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Really inspiring. Thank you so much. My question and sort of, kind of inquiry really around this is, what I mean, you kind of alluded to some of this, but what are the boundaries between sort of that kind of organizational leadership development in this design, and very much the personal growth and development, and kind of where do you see sort of kind of the interventions almost like stopping and starting, if they can, where it gets kind of quite personal around this, becomes almost quite a a deep personal transformational sort of almost like a psychotherapeutic, eco-psychotherapeutic experience.
Right.
That's kind of like what I've experienced a little bit myself, and we're working with some groups. I was quite curious how you might manage that through this sort of design program, or does it come in at all?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It's a great question. I want to tell you, I literally viscerally had the direct experience of your question, because I did the workshop that with part of my study with individual people that said they wanted to come to it, not their organizations. They were all from different organizations. So they were individually engaging in it. And then out of that, I got my first engagement, which I just ran in June with an organization and the team. And I had a struggle with the team, Simon. It was a real struggle because, once again, the leader of the team loved it and wanted to bring it. We had some calls beforehand, but not everybody was aligned with the experience, Simon. Or there was who was talking about accessibility? There was an accessibility issue for one person too, in terms of being able to even walk on the trail. So Simon, it was a lot more challenging to have it be a rich, great experience for a team where people had very different perspectives of what this is, how can it, what's it for me? Why are we doing this as a team? A number of people had a great experience, but there were a few that really struggled, and I didn't want to be here, and I can't be away from my kids. I can't be off cell phone for like simple stuff, Simon, that I just didn't, we thought through a lot of the stuff, but we missed some stuff. We just missed it. Yeah. And it was a problem because we went to an area where there was cell phone at the parking lot, but no cell service at the site. And I just, and half the people had kids, and some young kids, and they can't, they just can't be away. Even, if there's an emergency with their kid, they can't be off the grid for 6 hours or whatever. So stuff like that, Simon, made it really clear that as I look to do it with teams, with organizations, there needs to be much more of a scoping and discussion of how do we want to unfold this for the team, and then even having some teaming conversations to craft an experience together, like a co-created experience. And that's something that I'm going to be exploring. Otherwise, I think it is better suited to individual leaders that are attracted to this, that want to come in and have a cool experience with other leaders from the organizations, and not necessarily the team. The whole team is going to be a different process, I think, for me.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, I learned a lot. And actually kind of, it created a churn in the company too. And I felt really bad about that because of something that happened. So it's like, welcome to the world of working with teams again. It's been a long time, Simon, since I've done a program like this with teams.
Chris, Emily has her hand up. I'll shut up.
Oh yeah, Emily, and then I'll come back to Marianne. Yeah, Emily.
You actually started to land on where one of my questions, I had two questions. One was really about trying to understand what kind of follow-up have you been able to have with the participants in this to try to understand, it sounds like there were some really powerful insights. And so as they re-enter the regular demands or challenges of day-to-day living, how were they able to hold on to the insights and actually integrate it into their work? And then the second part you just started to touch on, which is, I think sometimes it can be really difficult when we have a profound experience as a leader, as an individual, and we want to share that or bring that back into our family, our community, our organizations, and they don't necessarily want us to change, or there's some, challenges with trying to bring the group along. And so I'm curious if you can talk to how did people integrate this into their work as leaders, or like what you were just saying with the team, there's different challenges to consider.
Yeah. I think the first one really, Emily, is really about I noticed coming out of my research study, the integration call was the interview at the end, right? So that was a week to 4 weeks later. When I did the engagement, we had 2 calls before the experience with the smaller leadership team, a group of 4, the whole team is 11. A group of 4 to talk about it, to set something, and then another call with the whole team, Emily, before the experience, to just kind of say, hey, this is what the experience is going to be like, and do you have any questions? Let's talk about this. So that was, instead of just surprising them on it, like come to this ropes course and we'll surprise you, it was to really prepare them to then say, we're going to have the experience, and then we're going to have 2 more calls after that are called integration calls. And so I do think that my learning from this was that if it's a team thing and they're committed to wanting to embed more of this, it would probably be way more than just 2. It might be like a 6-month engagement. Every 2 weeks, the team is meeting and discussing how they're still working with the practices. Are they still going outside and doing things, and whatever that is, or the practices inside as well as outside. So that would be something that I would want to, in an engagement process, engaging the leader or the team, how do we want to craft this so that it can embed this more over time? And I think with an actual team, there needs to be a commitment to a longer process. Otherwise, it becomes just a retreat, Emily. Just a nice, literally, like if we just went and made soap at a low, like people do that in San Francisco. They made perfume for half a day, their own perfume scent. There's lots of cool things you can do as team building, but this would fall into that if it was just the retreat and maybe one call. And so that's a key there. I think in terms of the working with teams going forward and with that leader that wants it for the whole team, I do think it's just a longer engagement process that's more around leadership development, that conversation, not a retreat for my team, but is this something you want to be committed to? And is there a way we can enroll the whole team in this process? And if not, we won't go forward. So, and I know
that reminds me of people participating in what they help create, right? You're engaging them in the process of getting them ready. To Kathy's comment, this readiness and preparedness, and then afterwards, that integration, you're asking for them to continue to participate in this experience that they had that is transformative or does help them evolve.
Yeah, and the calls that we had, Emily, were really great. I mean, we had to delay one call. We wanted it within a week, and it turned out to be almost 3 weeks after the experience. And the sharings and what people shared were really insightful, in that they were weaving some of that back into their work and their day-to-day life, especially the hard eyes, soft eyes, the perspective, the focused perspective, the broad perspective, the choices around the cairn building and being intuitively checking in with self around choices, as well as looking at team. So there was a lot of really, and then just using nature as a rejuvenator, as a way to just break up the stuff that's binding me, and go out and spend some time even during the work week in nature. And then again, to Dale's point, this is a lot for city folk, right? That are in big cities and they don't easily have access to nature, but it can also be suburbia. I mean, Dale, in suburbia where I live, people get in their car, go to their work, get back in their car, go to their work, go to the gym, go to a restaurant, gym, car, restaurant, work. And that's with natural beauty all around him, Dale. And that's not like a city. And so it's like, how do we break that up and get people out into nature a little bit, just even a teeny bit, and it changes things. And this is Richard Lou's brilliant work, is all the data about spending time in nature, folks. So I would say to Emily, the final thing is I would need to spend time with the leader and the team to craft something that's going to work for the team, and that they're engaged, that they're committed, and even like commitment processes. Are we all committed to doing that? Yeah. Does anybody have any like almost consensus building? Because I want to actually model nature in that process too. This is the feedback loops and cyclical and coming back again. It's not like march to it. Here we go. I'm the leader. We're going to go do this thing. Come on, everybody. That's old school. All right, Kathy.
It also kind of triggers in my head that in any kind of retreat or training or team kind of experience, we always have people at various stages of readiness.
Yeah.
And willingness and openness to what's happening. And often there are, maybe it's the team leader, maybe it's somebody else that's kind of promoting a certain way of a certain experience or something together, because they see it before the rest of the people do. Yeah. So I think it raises some really interesting questions about if we find that connecting people with nature is a powerful way of helping connect us to the more impact measures rather than financial accountability, but impact accountability, for example, as leadership, then it behooves us to ask the question, what conditions are necessary to create conditions conducive to this kind of experience? So that's kind of where you were going, which is what's the prep work that can help make this happen?
Yeah, I love what you're saying about impact, Kathy, that piece of, not just financial accountability and financial results, but impact inside the company, with teams, with individuals, with the whole company. I mean, I think that's, a big part of this, the underlying for me on this, Kathy, is how can we also, underneath all of this, as people go through an experience of more connection to nature, more insights in relation to nature, that they're making different choices about the future of our planet, in whatever way they can, so that they're more engaged in dealing with locally with climate change issues, or with environmental challenges, or personally, or with their company, or whatever. So that's the underlying. I don't want to build that in as this is a part of it. It's more, my hope is that there will be that kind of consciousness rising to want to support more of what's needed. Yeah, so let's go, Frank.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I noticed we will not have our breakout groups. It was really very impactful and beautiful. The thing that's coming up for me is the word purpose. It also links to impact, what we've just heard. I think this experience will really evoke life purpose. Also, the spiritual experience you had with the pine tree. So you start co-creating with nature and you get new insights. So I haven't heard a lot about it from you right now, but I think there has been loads of it. So I wanted to test that.
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel like it's the journey is at all levels, Frank. And the journey for me is at all levels, spiritual, emotional, physical, with that aspect of purpose too for me. In fact, the whole relationship with the pine tree, Frank, is a call, like a soul purpose calling. So that connection literally led me on a soul purpose journey to say, I want to do more of this now. And that insight came after 5 days in nature. So I do, my hope is that there's a way of meeting individuals and leaders and organizations wherever they are, and then continuing to open the door with nature as teacher and guide. Nature as teacher and guide, not me as teacher and guide. Like when I'm out there and I'm holding the space for the group, I'm very aware that I step back and back and back, and it's just a light question here, get them out on the land and doing a practice there. And the magic and the work is done by the natural world. And so, like you said, insights, epiphanies. Oh, I just watched these bees pollinating that, people were saying that, they were like really getting into it. And even when I walk around in nature, am I really that thoughtful and present? And that's the power of actually creating practice in nature that slows people down to then really investigate or be more present.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I know we just have a few more minutes. Was there anything else on the chat, Daniel? Did I miss anything there?
I think you've answered a lot of the questions that come in, other people popping in with other things that they're reminded of. And Chris, you were bringing in so many things from what we have been talking about over the last 2 years. Like as you're talking, I'm reminded, and Kathy had brought up of Lenny's nature-based coaching. And then I'm also reminded of when Lauren was speaking about disaster response and resilience, and about like the time that we spend in nature and how that builds resilience.
Yes.
Like that fits all in here too. It's just so cool that it's all kind of coalescing here in this beautiful thesis that you pulled together.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Steph. Yeah, and thank you, everyone. I know we're kind of wrapping up, so I so appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to just put my email in the chat, but then I know that Steph's going to take us home.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because Emily's asking where and how can we learn more, and so so Chris will put his contact in the chat for you if you want to reach out for more from Chris. So Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as you all know, we gather together on the third Tuesday of every month. And so next month being August already, I can't believe it, will be August 16th. And we're going to have Martin, who frequently joins our calls. He's going to be there to share with us. And we'll have more on that topic that we'll share out by email. as we prep for that. So once again, it's that 1 p.m. Central Time on August 16th, and then mark your calendar even ahead again for September 20th. Same time, same place. And so we will look forward to seeing all of you there. So thank you all so much. Chris, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you everybody for your attention and engagement and great questions here. So
Yeah,
what a fun conversation.
Thank you, everyone. It's so great to see you all. Thanks.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Kathy.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
folks.